All right, everybody, welcome to lesson 4 here in our study entitled Steadfast out of First Thessalonians. And we are now in the middle part here of First Thessalonians chapter number 2. And the title of this lesson is The Spirit of Spiritual Parenting. Now, these lessons are geared toward a lot of our adult Sunday school classes, but then also we deal with our teen Sunday school classes. And so you will want to make different applications based on the group that you're teaching, but I think that there will be some solid truth out of the actual scriptures here that will help us to be very effective and have some strong classes here under this lesson. So by way of introduction, I'm going to deal with more of just the concept and the approach that we're taking. We're really drawing from what Paul is establishing here in this chapter as he makes illustration on how he dealt with these people. And we've already covered heavy into their background, so I'm not going to go into more of that. Again, as you recap and review with your class, feel free to do that. But most people would understand the love of a parent. Now, there's exceptions to that, and no doubt there may be some people that don't have a great relationship or didn't have a great relationship with their parent. But we would know how a mother naturally cares for her children. Again, if somebody didn't do that, we look at that as unnatural. A father will willingly sacrifice for his family. Parents will invest time, energy, resources, and ultimately give affection because they genuinely desire to see the best for their children. And so what's amazing about this passage is Paul, he didn't have biological children. Paul had never been married, but he was writing about these believers that he had led to Christ or helped establish there in that city. And they were getting rooted in their faith. But as Paul was articulating his care for them, he was articulating it as a loving parent would care for a child. So as he's looking at them, they were not ministry projects. They were not statistics. It wasn't a numbers game. It wasn't some trophy that he was trying to then put on for other people. It was how he viewed people, realizing they needed to be nurtured. They needed guidance. They needed to be invested in. And so, again, you think of modern day ministry, some of the things that I brought up there, that can become the focus sometimes in ministry. It's how many people did we have in our class and how many people were in attendance. And no doubt as numbers go up, that's more souls, more lives, more impact, which is an awesome thing. But here he's using this picture of both a mother and a father, and he's describing how he cares for them. And in doing so, it really gives us a very clear picture in Scripture of what discipleship should look like, what parenting and even spiritual leadership as a whole should look like. So if we're parents, if we're teachers, if we're church leaders, or just believers that are trying to grow in Christ, in this passage, it helps us to recognize the power of spiritual influence and the fact that it requires more than just giving somebody information. You've heard me say it over and over again. We're looking for transformation, not just the information. And so it requires the heart of a spiritual parent. Now, the scripture, the text that we're going to be using, I'll read this to you, not because you can't read it for yourself. It's just because some of you prefer to listen to the lesson a little bit to get familiar with it. So the scripture says this, starting in verse 7, "But we were gentle among you, even as a nurse cherisheth her children. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were willing to have imparted unto you not the gospel of God only, but also our own souls, because you were dear unto us. For you remember, brethren, our labor and travail, for laboring night and day, because we would not be chargeable unto any of you. We preached unto you the gospel of God, your witnesses, and God also, how holily and justly and unblameably we have behaved ourselves among you that believe. As ye know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you, as a father doth his children, that ye would walk worthy of God, who hath called you unto his kingdom and glory." So when we go through the lesson, we're really going to discover 3 necessary ingredients of successful spiritual parenting. So again, you can, in your class, if you're teaching a couples class where people have children, you can talk about actual parenting as you do this, but also make sure you get into the spiritual parenting. It's not just about our own personal children, but people we're training, people we're helping to reach in the faith, which is what Paul was actually talking about. So it'd be an application for your personal family. The actual context of the passage is dealing with spiritual children. And so really this applies to, again, the teenagers, people without children, anybody making a difference in any capacity or somebody that would like to. So first and foremost, what we see first that must happen in the idea of spiritual parenting and spiritual influence is this: you must learn to love them. All right, love them. 1 Thessalonians 2 verses 7 and 8 talks about we were gentle among you, even as a nurse cherisheth her children. So he starts with this idea of a nursing mother caring for the children. And again, the emphasis is on affection. And so if you stop and think about what are some of the characteristics of a nursing mother, someone who's taking care of a infant, there's that nurturing, there's that protection, right? You don't just let the kid do whatever they want to do. There's looking after them. There's sacrifices for loss of sleep, fill in the blank of all the things that you can think of. There's patience in caring for the child. And so he uses this term gentle. Now, a lot of times people think about spiritual leadership and they think about authority, they think about correction and instruction, the person who's in charge. But even though those are important, and I think it's good to have strong leadership, the focal point in the early stages is on gentleness. And no doubt in rearing children, there has to be the firm, and we're going to look later at the idea of giving direction. But what he's saying is this: I was gentle. He says, so being affectionately desirous of you. It shows that Paul had a deep affection, a sincere concern for people. And so Paul genuinely loved these people. It was a very natural affection that he had for them. And so here's the question for us. Are we affectionately desirous of the people that we need to minister to? Are we willing to impart, not just the gospel unto people, but ourselves unto them, just like Paul said? I mean, that's a pretty remarkable statement when you think about that. Also our own souls. So again, he's given more than a message. He'd go and he'd preach the sermons, but here's what he was doing. He was giving of himself. So real discipleship, true discipleship is not just, again, passing on information. That's important. You as a teacher, you're giving information, but you're also investing in your life. So you get to, as a teacher, live this out as you're teaching this lesson to your people. You're investing in their life. And notice this, the motivation is because they were dear unto them. Paul wasn't doing it trying to get something out of them. It was not, a ministry assignment. Okay, this is where I'm assigned to go right now. No, this is something where he cared about them. He was affectionate. They were dear unto him. And this is the same type thing that Jesus modeled with his disciples. He says in John 15:15, henceforth I call you not servants. He says, but I have called you friends. And so Jesus, you know what he did? He spent his time with people. That's what Paul did from city to city. He spent time with people. And so people are far more likely to receive truth or instruction from someone that they know cares about them. You've heard the cliche statement, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so this is an illustration that you can use if you like to. It's more of a bank illustration. It's not a perfect illustration because I don't believe that our relationships should be transactional, if I could say it that way. But think about it this way. If you've never made a deposit into the bank and you show up and you say, hey, I want to make a withdrawal. I want to pull something out of the bank is going to say to you, like, no way, you can't do that. You cannot, until you've put some deposits in, you cannot make a withdrawal. And sometimes we expect things out of people, but many times what has to happen is this: we have to first invest. We have to make deposits into people. Maybe it's the phone call. Maybe it's spending a little bit of time. Maybe it's praying for somebody and letting them know that you're praying for them before you can ask of something. And so a lot of times the loving is that giving part first. We want to see a return, not really for us, but for the Lord. And so children will flourish when they know their children love them. All right. If you're, teaching, we have the opportunity, many of us have the opportunity, not just teach in a Sunday school class, but also in an actual school setting. Man, when they know their teachers care, there's a difference in how the information is received. And same idea, believers mature when they know that somebody is invested in them. So before Paul ever gets into correcting them, which he will, before he starts challenging them, which he will, before he gets into all the instructions they've got to do, first, you know what he did? He loved on them. And so spiritual parenting really begins with a genuine affection. As you teach the lesson, though, go into it with the mindset and think through and go, okay, how can I show love to our people before I teach the lesson? That would be a great thing. You get this in advance. You're preparing. God's leading you. Maybe you make the phone call. Maybe you invest in some people's lives. And again, not to make yourself the hero of the story, but to say this is what it's supposed to be about. We're starting with this gentleness, this affection, this love. But then second, notice this, we examined that he does this. He then not just loves them, but then he shows them. He says, for ye remember, brethren, our labor and travail. Verses 9 and 10, he deals with that. And he goes from affection and he moves on to example. And his love was visible through the sacrifice that he made. He uses terms like labor and travail. That's hard work. There's a weariness. There's personal sacrifice that takes place. He goes on to say that it was night and day. And it was because he didn't want the gospel to be hindered. He knew how important the task was. And so he was willing to sacrifice personal comfort for their spiritual benefit. He was willing to recognize that even though he wasn't a physical father or a physical parent, it was going to cost him something with that mindset. And so, what's it going to take to actually show someone what you're training them to be? Meaning, how is it that you're setting the example? Are you taking somebody alongside of you in different areas of the ministry? Maybe you visit somebody, you take them with you, teaching people how to be a witness, teaching people how to actually host people. There are some people that are given to hospitality. Others that could be if they were just shown. Maybe they never grew up in a family where people were hospitable or had people over. You can invest that time, that energy, that prayer, that sacrifice, and ultimately that consistency by way of your example. By the way, teach people to do that as well in your class. The people that are leading today shouldn't be the only ones that are leading 2 years from now. And so sometimes what happens, we don't pass it on. We have people that are faithful, but we don't pass that on to the next generation. We need to do that. And so Paul gives the example by explaining his conduct. He talks about what he did. Your witnesses, you saw my life. He said, we holily and justly and unblameably have behaved ourselves. And so, as he deals with that, he's describing, I wasn't just talking the talk. I didn't just come in to the city and say some words and then just move on out while you guys go through the hard thing. He said, no, you saw me live it. I lived holily. His relationship with God was right. He lived the right way before God. But then also justly, his treatment of people was right. And then he says unblameably, what that means is his conduct was above reproach. In no way was his good able to be evil spoken of. Paul talks about his working with the law before he was saved. He said it was as touching the law, blameless. Paul tried to live a blameless life even before he was saved. And that idea was, without handles, meaning there was nothing in his life you could grab onto and go, see, that's where you're not right, Paul. I mean, he was living above reproach. And so we know Paul wasn't perfect, and he wasn't claiming that, but he was showing them it's important to be that example. As the teachers, here's the personal challenge for us. We have to be the examples. We've got to be above board because people are watching us. We don't want to be the excuse why people would live complacent or not a on fire, Christian life. We want to set the example. So not just love on them, that is important, but now we need to show them. How well do we show others what following Christ actually looks like? So later on in 1 Timothy, one of his later books that he wrote, there to 1 and 2 Timothy, but 1 Timothy 4:12 says, be thou an example of the believers. He tried to impart that to Timothy, and then Timothy did that, which was awesome. So by way of application, here's what you're dealing with. Children, a lot of times, will imitate what parents do more than what parents say. I have found myself at this stage of my life saying words, and I'm like, that sounds like my father, right? And so you'll say things, and what happens is this. I didn't on purpose learn some of the things that come out, but I was observing as a child, and so many times people are, yes, they're listening to what you say, but they're really watching how you live. And a spiritual parent understands that influence is earned through example. You are teaching somebody. And so I put a little note in here that it's not always easy to follow through or to live out what we feel in our hearts or what we want God to do in the people that we're spiritually investing in. However, to make a lasting impact, we must find ways to let God work through us and ultimately consistently set that example. So we love them and then we show them. But then the third ingredient that Paul deals with, if we're going to be the right kind of a spiritual parent or spiritual leader, is this. The third ingredient is lead them. So he shifts away from that picture of a nursing mother and now gets into what we would consider that picture of a father. And he says this, as a father doth his children. So obviously there are exceptions to this, but generally the mother is very natural in the nurture part of it, that gentleness. And we all need that, including in spiritual leadership. We need to be gentle with people, patient with people. But notice this, he goes on to say, here's the shift to the father's role, and there's more attention given to then directing the child. And that's a lot of times the role of that father in the home, leading the direction, setting the way in which the family will go. And so Paul says we exhorted and we comforted and we charged every one of you. So it shows that he was very intentional about it. And that is something we need to be in our spiritual parenting and our spiritual influence, is intentional in what we do. He says, I dealt with every one of you. It was a personal touch. So I love the fact that if we get up and man, you can teach a large number of people in your class, or if you were to preach a sermon or something like that, you get the multitudes that were in front of Jesus. But there's also the intentional discipleship training that has to take place that's individual. And so it shows that there's a need for making an impact by working with the individual. Here's the words he used: exhorting. All right, that means he was encouraging them to go forward. That's a good thing to do. Be somebody who finds people doing good. Encourage people in your class. Teach your class to find people doing good and to encourage them when they see people doing what is right. Also, he comforted them. All right, this is something that is where he brings strength to them because they were struggling. So he comforted them. He recognized, man, they're going through it. It's difficult there. This isn't easy. And so he was able to help in that area. But then notice this, that he also charged them, which means he challenged them with a seriousness and a conviction. So Paul understood that people needed different forms of help. And when you lead people, you must know what their needs are. There are some people that need encouragement, some people that need comfort, some people that ultimately need challenged. But good leadership is able to provide all three of those. So later on, I talked to you about one of the later books he wrote, 2 Timothy 4. It talks about preach the word, but he says reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. You know what that is this. It's knowing how to lead, when to lead. Do you need to give, the correction in that area? Do you need to find and encourage in an area? What's actually needed in the direction giving? And so that is the part of leading them. So every time Paul was investing, he was pointing toward spiritual maturity. He wasn't trying to help people get more comfortable. He was willing to comfort them, but it was the intent of leading them the right way and helping them to stay on the right path. All right, he was trying to help them in their walk with God. Paul reinforces that in Ephesians 4. I give it to you, but he talks about walking worthy of the vocation wherewith you're called. And so when it comes to spiritual parenting, it involves more than just loving people, and it goes even deeper than just setting the example. Mature believers must help younger believers grow. We do that by setting the direction and actively leading people. Be intentional about it. All right, so people are going to need encouragement when they're weak. They're going to need comfort when they're hurting, and they're definitely going to need challenge when they are drifting. And so Paul wanted them to know the truth, but not just know it. He wanted them to walk in the truth. John said it this way, 3 John 1:4, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. And so what an awesome thing it is that we can have an impact in a younger generation, in our peers, and people that are younger in the faith than us. We get the opportunity to be spiritual parents, spiritual leaders, spiritual influencers. And so by way of conclusion, here's what the lesson gives us. All right, there's a beautiful picture here of spiritual parenting here in the passage. It talks about that tenderness, that gentleness as a mother, and learning through, to give the personal example and ultimately have that forward look as a father that would guide and lead the home. All right, so we get to do that spiritually with people. And so the question is not whether or not we have influence. If you're teaching, you definitely do. And by the way, people in your class do as well. So help them to see that even though they're not the teacher or they're not the person that may run certain ministries, they are influencing people and they can be spiritual parents and spiritual leaders. But we want people to recognize we need to invest in other people. So it's got to go deeper than just attending your class. That's a blessing when people are faithful to class. But what we want to do is get them gaining, yes, the information, but have a transformation where they look around and say, who can I love? Who can I be gentle with? Who can I bring along and nurture like the nurse cherisheth her child? And then who is it that I can set the example for? And then the question would be this, where can I lead people? And so we've got to go deeper and have that where we're walking worthy of God, which is ultimately there in the passage. So successful parenting spiritually happens when we love them, when we show them, and then when we lead them to be more like Jesus. What an awesome blessing it is. Good luck in teaching. Appreciate your investment in it. God bless.